Shaun of the Dead is 20 years old this year, and it's back in cinema screens around the world. How's that for a slice of fried gold? Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. Before we go any further, I just want to say a big welcome to all the new subscribers, dozens of you who've come on board in the last few days. Thanks, I think, largely to my video on the tripods, which went up about a week ago. Lots and lots of new people watching, over 2,000 views for that one video alone. Fantastic. I'm so pleased that you've come on board, and I hope that you stick around. This is very much a retro channel with a couple of new bits and pieces here and there. But going forward, we're going to be largely retro with looking back at lots of classic TV from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and maybe the 90s. And some classic films and, of course, a few modern films and bits and pieces, all points in between. So if you've just found this channel, I hope you stick around. I hope you enjoy the content that's to come. Today's content is sort of retro, I suppose. I think you can call a film that's 20 years old a little bit retro. We're talking about Shaun of the Dead, Edgar Wright's first proper cinematic full-length feature, which came in the wake of the brilliant sitcom Spaced. Spaced, as I'm sure you'll remember, is the classic era-defining sitcom that ran on Channel 4 from 1989 to 2001 in two 7-part series. It told the story of two millennium-age youngsters. We had Tim, played by Simon Pegg, and Daisy, played by Jessica Stevenson. They were both looking for somewhere to live, and they met by chance in a cafe, decided to pretend to be a couple so they could get a flat in a very odd house run by the eccentric Marsha, played by Julia Deakin. The show starred, obviously, Simon Pegg and Jessica Stevenson, with support from Nick Frost, Mark Heap, and Julia Deakin as Marsha. I often think that Julia Deakin, her contribution to the series, gets a little bit overlooked because of the star power of the leads. The show was created by Simon Pegg and Jessica Stevenson, and they co-wrote the scripts, and it was directed by Edgar Wright, who of course was a great friend of Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, and he gave the series that feel, that image, that style of directing that we came to see in the films later on. Filmed single camera, unlike a lot of sitcoms at the time that were done multi-camera in the studio. This was all done by fast cuts, and the scripts were full of these very smart cultural references, taking their cues from books, games, TV, films, all sorts of cultural references dotted about there, from the things that influenced both Simon and Jessica as they grew up and as they started crafting this series. It only ran for 2 series. There was always talk of a 3rd series. It never happened, of course. But Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, and of course Edgar Wright moved across then and took the skills they'd learned, I suppose you could say, onto the big screen for Shaun of the Dead. I believe that the idea for the film came about largely because Edgar Wright, who directed it and of course co-wrote it and has gone on to do some pretty remarkable films in his own right, he had been playing computer games all night. He got up early in the morning, walked to the nearest shop to get himself a refreshing can of Coke, and just wondered what it would be like, the streets deserted, imagining a zombie apocalypse taking place in that sort of environment, because previous zombie films, Romero's films, had all taken place in Midwestern settings, in malls. And he worked together with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost to create an homage to the zombie films that they loved. Now, my first confession here is that when Shaun of the Dead came out, I'd never really seen many, or indeed any zombie films. I'd never seen the Romero films. I'd never seen Night of the Living Dead. And I think in the back of my head there was something slightly macabre about the idea of zombies, that the recently deceased coming back to life. And of course I'd seen the Hammer Plague of the Zombies film from the 60s, and I'd seen some of the old black and white zombie films, White Zombie and I Walked with a Zombie. But I always associated zombies with sort of voodoo and Haiti and stuff like that. And although I was, I suppose, aware of that Romero recreation of zombies as ghouls in Night of the Living Dead, I hadn't sampled the delights of those particular films. So Shaun of the Dead opened me up to a whole new world. And what's interesting about Shaun of the Dead, I think, bearing in mind it came out 20 years ago, whether by accident or design, Shaun of the Dead found itself spearheading a new wave of zombie entertainment for the 21st century, as zombies became the new go-to monster for the new century. We'd had vampires, we'd had zombies before, we'd had Frankenstein's monster, we'd had mummies and all sorts of creepies and crawlies over the past couple of decades. But now it was the turn of the zombie to become resurrected, and Shaun of the Dead was right there at the beginning of that. Now, I saw the film originally pretty much concurrently with Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead, incidentally probably Zack Snyder's best film. And I suddenly became enthralled by these stories of these apocalyptic stories. And I've always liked the post-apocalypse story, as some of you may know. I do like the end of the world. I became fascinated by these stories of people on the run, society collapsing, people having to escape from these creatures, these monsters. And of course, we'd had 28 Days Later as well, although they weren't, strictly speaking, zombies. And then when you had this 1-2 punch of Shaun of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead, you suddenly had a new wave of films focusing on these things. And it was a post-millennial thing, I suppose, some sort of paranoia in the beginning of the early 21st century about where we were going and the world becoming a bit distant and remote and people seeming a bit distant and remote. I don't know. But Shaun of the Dead tapped into that brilliantly. But what I like about Shaun of the Dead is that it is an endlessly rewatchable film, and God knows I've endlessly rewatched it. It is one of those films, I mean, I bought it on DVD as soon as it came out and watched it to death. I bought it on Blu-ray, I've got it on 4K whenever it's on TV, or I find it's on TV. I find myself watching it wherever the film is. When I find it on TV, I'll just watch the rest of it. I watched it on Netflix or Amazon a few weeks ago because I just wanted something that I knew. And I just think it's such a perfect film for what it is. And as I was saying, it's not the best film ever made. It's not one of the classics. But it's certainly one of my favourite films because it has all the people that I liked in it at the time. I loved Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. It has Jessica Stevenson, or Jessica Hines turns up in it briefly, and Martin Freeman turning up briefly. We had Dylan Moran, Lucy Davis, Kate Ashfield, who I didn't know at the time. There was lots of people whose work I admired, but particularly it was very much the next stage on from the Space TV series. And it is a film that is endlessly rewatchable because it's endlessly quotable, and it's only as I've become more familiar with the zombie oeuvre that I realised how many little references there are. From all the things, you know, the very obvious ones like We're Coming to Get You, Barbara, Forey Electrics, which is the shop that Shaun works in, which is a reference, of course, to Ken Forey from the first Night of the Living Dead. And there are so many more that I'm picking up. Even now, I watched it a couple of weeks ago again, and there was something I picked up there which I hadn't realised before. It's a very beautifully crafted script, obviously crafted with love and devotion and dedication, out of respect to those films that they loved. And it doesn't parody zombie films, it doesn't take the mickey out of them, but it doffs its cap at them and says, thank you, you've inspired all this. The story of the film, as you will know, I'm sure you all know, it's basically the life of slacker Shaun, played by Simon Pegg, who is in his late 20s and he's in a dead-end job working for a little electrical shop in Crouch End. And he's the subject of ridicule from all his co-workers who are younger than him and have got dreams and ambitions. Shaun just seems to idle. He's in a relationship with Liz, played by Kate Ashfield. She's exasperated because his ambitions seem to go no further than spending the night down at the local pub, the Winchester, with his best friend Ed, played by Nick Frost. Ed sort of squats in the house that Shaun shares with his friend Pete, played by Peter Serafinowicz. But Ed likes a little puff, and he's very laid back. He plays computer games. He's got no respect for people and authority. And everybody's a bit fed up with him just hanging around. But he's Shaun's best friend. He can't kick him out into the streets. But that's causing a lot of exasperation in his relationships. After a night out in the Winchester, she gives him a bit of an ultimatum that she wants to do more with her life than just going down the pub every day. So he promises to book a night out for the two of them at an exclusive restaurant. He forgets to do so. She's not very happy and she finishes with him. He goes round to her flat to try and make up with her, but she chucks him out. He goes home, he and Ed go to the pub, the Winchester, and they get drunk, very drunk. They go home, and the next morning the world is turned upside down. Some sort of apocalypse has taken place. Zombies are walking the street. All the people from the neighbourhood that they've seen the day before in various human incarnations are now shuffling mutilated zombie creatures. And before long, Ed and Shaun, when they finally realise what's going on, and after a very amusing and iconic scene in the back garden with a zombie that they throw records at, they go on a hunt. Shaun suddenly realises he's got something to live for. He's got to save Liz, who's stuck in the flat. He's got to save his mother, Barbara, played by the brilliant Penelope Wilton, who is married to Shaun's stepfather, who he doesn't get on with. Bill Nighy, and they have to find their way to safety. And the only place of safety they can think of is the Winchester. Just talking about it makes me feel tingly and warm. I just love this film. It is so funny and it's so well crafted in that it is genuinely funny a lot. Not in a joke way, but in observations and characters saying funny things, which is what people do. That's what the best comedy is. People naturally saying things which are funny in the situation that they're in. I think comedy which just has people rattling out jokes can get a bit tiresome, but the humour rises from the situation and the characters as they're established. It's violent, of course. There's a lot of gore in it. There's a lot of classic zombie type gore, but the film has such a heart to it as well. It's all about Shaun really finding a reason to carry on, I suppose. Not that he's suicidal, but finding a purpose in life where he's been drifting. All of a sudden, he's got things to do. He's got to protect the people he loves. And that energizes him and makes him almost like a leader amongst this slightly confused group of people who don't know what the hell's going on. It's got real heart as well. I mean, I'm not going to... Shall I spoil it? The scenes involving his mother later on in the film. Really very emotional when something happens that really affects Shaun in a fundamental sort of way. And you've got lots of stuff about his relationship with Liz, that it's sort of going nowhere, and yet they clearly belong together. And even Ed, who's this loser, you sort of feel sorry for him towards the end of the film. I just love this film. It is just so well made, and it was made on a budget of something like £4 million, and eventually in its first release earned I think something like 45 million, which we're not talking Marvel style super duper millions here, but this is the film that made a good profit on a small budget and sort of led to the later films in the Cornetto trilogy, Hot Fuzz and World's End, a film which to this day I can't get on with for some reason. But it's a great film. I mean, if you've not seen it before, see it now in the cinema. If you've even if you've just seen it on TV or on physical media, see it in the cinema. I'm hoping to be able to see it in the cinema. It's Sunday afternoon today. I was planning to see it, but I cried off, and I'll try and catch it maybe during the week. 'Cause it's still on. It's still on in certain screenings, so you can catch up with it. Go and see it in the cinema and get the full impact of it. I mean, I just think there's something about it. And I think if you connect with it and the people in it and the characters they're playing, you will get a real buzz out of it. And if you are an aficionado of zombie cinema, you will pick up on all those little references and gags and little things. There's little things dotted right the way through it. And as I said, I'm picking them up even now. It's just a great, to me, a warm hug of a film. And even though it's about a very grim topic, it does it with humour, style, real sense of invention, and a real sense of reverence to the films that inspired it. I love Shaun of the Dead, and because of that, and I know I always say I can't give things 10 because that's a high bar, but to hell with it, Shaun of the Dead gets a 10 from me. If you've not seen it, you've got to see it. It's just a great film. And if you want to know more about it, and why wouldn't you, I can heartily recommend this book, You've Got Red on You, written by Clark Collis, published by... This came out a few years ago, and I thoroughly devoured it. Published by 1984 Publishing. And it's a big chunky red book that's got red on it. And it tells you everything you could want to know about the making of any film, much less Shaun of the Dead. So yeah, Shaun of the Dead's in cinemas now. Can't recommend it highly enough. If you've seen it or if you've not seen it, it's just one of my favourite films. End of. Right, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, and as I said, thank you to everybody who's come on board the last couple of days. Really appreciate it. Please stick around, watch what's coming up. There's more retro stuff coming in the next few days. Plus a review of Joker Folie à Deux, which I'm about to see in about an hour. And I'll be recording that tonight and uploading it tomorrow, hopefully. So please stick around. Lots more to come on this channel. I will see you soon. And until I do, keep taking the stuff.